Finally, Donald Trump has disparaged Mexican Americans, women, Muslims, handicapped people, and he has finally come all the way out on going after black people. Previously, he just had discriminated against black people in housing and trying to get innocent black men falsely convicted of rape, given the death penalty. He previously had claimed that he was outreaching to the black community by not showing up at any black church of significance. But now, with this stop and frisk policy that he wants to institute nationally, no, he wants to institute it just in Chicago. No, he wants to institute it nationally. I'm still trying to figure out which one it is. But purely, clearly, it is something that is an anathema to black people. It's targeting, it's profiling, it's racist in its application. Now, true, the Supreme Court has said that stop and frisk itself is constitutional, given certain parameters. The way that it was instituted in places like New York and Baltimore and Milwaukee were clearly unconstitutional in their applications, and that is exactly what the federal court ruled on. Okay, so stop and frisk is constitutional, but it must be constitutional also in its application, and that's where the issue is, because more blacks and Hispanics were racially profiled and targeted in the use of this practice than white people, Caucasians, anybody with super light white skin. Anyway, here's the clip from the Joy Reid show regarding Mr. Trump and racist Rudy Giuliani's view of stop and frisk, and how they basically love to lie. Trump lied during the debates. Rudy Giuliani has constantly lied about his saving of all these black lives. I've saved more black lives than anyone. You know, these guys, they're not concerned about black lives. I am. I've saved more black lives with my stop and frisk. Bullshit. Anyway, here's the clip. You know, I don't do impersonations per se, so you'll have to forgive me for a poor, actually a piss poor imitation of Giuliani, and I'll try not to do it again.
AM Joy. Donald Trump stumped in the heart of ruby red Waukesha, Wisconsin this week with a law and order message tailor-made for a county that hasn't voted for a Democrat for president since 1964. Trump's speech came just days after his pitch for more stop and frisk during Monday's high-stakes debate. But as the New York Times points out regarding the stop and frisk regime that existed in New York until the city was sued on behalf of black and Latino residents, quote, by the end of 2013, the federal judge hearing the case ruled that the city's wholesale search practices violated the Constitution, unquote. Trump went on to falsely claim that stop and frisk was responsible for lowering crime in New York City.
In New York City, stop and frisk, we had 2,200 murders, and stop and frisk brought it down to 500 murders. It was continued on by Mayor Bloomberg, and it was terminated by current mayor. But stop and frisk had a tremendous impact on the safety of New York City, tremendous beyond belief. So when you say it has no impact, it really did. It had a very, very big impact.
Well, it's also fair to say, if we're going to talk about mayors, that under the current mayor, crime has continued to drop, including murders. So there is...
You're wrong.
No, I'm not.
Murders are up.
Joining me now is Michael Denzel Smith of The Nation. He's the author of the book that you'll be giving to every millennial that you know this Christmas season. Write it down. Check it out. Invisible Man Got the Whole World Watching. You will be reading that book in the next weeks, or you better be. Former Ohio State Senator Nina Turner and MSNBC political analyst Hugh Hewitt. Thank you all for being here. All right, I'm coming to you first, since I just did that book pitch for you, Michael Denzel Smith. When you hear this idea of bringing back stop and frisk, and Donald Trump wanting to nationalize this this concept that was ruled unconstitutional, in fact, what do you think?
I mean, honestly, if you're going to run a racist campaign, just go full tilt, right? Like, I think that's the thing. When he brought up that Nixonian language of law and order in the debate, and I mean, that's the Southern strategy. That's Nixon. That's Lee Atwater. That is the appeal to folks who believe in this sort of black urban threat that is creeping all the time. Like, go ahead. Like, tell us what it is. It's a surprise to me that it took him so long to get around to black folks in a way that he like hit every other group, and then like he's finally now implementing this sort of racist language around the policing of black people in this country. So I mean, I welcome it in that, like, I'm glad that Donald Trump's ideology is on full display.
Yeah, and I guess you're right. It's being very open, but it's also inaccurate, Hugh Hewitt. Crime in the 30 largest cities. We have the stats here from the FBI Uniform Crime Reports from 1990 through 2014 in the Brennan Center, 25 to 2016. Put these numbers together, and you can see the direction that crime is going. And yet you have Rudy Giuliani, who's become one of the chief surrogates for Donald Trump at this rally in Waukesha, where there are almost no African Americans. This was Rudy Giuliani in Wisconsin on Wednesday. Take a listen.
Decided in 1968, stop and frisk is constitutional. Donald Trump's description was totally correct. Hillary Clinton saying that the courts found stop and frisk to be unconstitutional was wrong. And worst of all, Lester Holt backed her up. Was he a campaign manager or a journalist?
Three things on this, Hugh Hewitt. Referencing 1968, which it seems to me just a clear and unambiguous sort of throwback, sort of like, you know, we'll go back to that era of 1960s. Stop and frisk being constitutional. This is a man who is a former attorney, a former U.S. attorney, I believe, former mayor, just plainly wrong, factually wrong. And it seems to display a contempt for our judicial system to basically pretend that a ruling, a federal judge's ruling on stop and frisk just never actually happened. Is this any way, Hugh Hewitt, to expand the base of the Donald Trump voter cohort and of the Republican Party?
Okay, before he answers, that rolling and reference back to 1968, if you are black or Hispanic, just think of your conditions back in 1968, okay? And that really is going to give us the warm and fuzzies about the Donald Trump campaign and his potential presidency, trying to take things back to 1968. You know, we had just gotten fair housing and voter rights, and there was a long way to go for all of those laws to actually take effect. And honestly, some of them really still hadn't. It wasn't until the 1970s where there was an actual push, obviously, for fair housing, voter rights, and total civil rights. But 1968, no, that wasn't, you know, that wasn't a very good year, as some call it, for black people. You know, I don't think it was a very good year for Hispanics, but I'm not Hispanic, so I really shouldn't comment on them. But for black people, I can tell you it was not a very good year. Anyway, here's Hugh Hewitt's answer. And you know, I found that he is kind of pulling himself back into the Republican fold more than he was before. Previously, he was, in my opinion, you know, if he wasn't a never Trump guy, he was damn close. And I think he is, he may not be 100% in the Trump camp, but he, you know, he's skirting on the outsides of it. Anyway, here's his response.
Well, Joy, a couple of facts. Stop and frisk generally is not unconstitutional. As it was practiced in New York, it was decided by the federal district court that it was because it was motivated by an impermissible racial bias. A special master has been appointed. They have revised and reworked the policy, and what is in place now is in fact constitutional. So it's a complicated fact check. 1968 Law and Order, yes, there are echoes of that campaign in this campaign because there are echoes of the tensions in this campaign. Just before we came on the air, I saw the news story of the leaked Hillary Clinton audio saying that Bernie Sanders supporters were living in their parents' basements. This is not going to endear her to the millennials.
What does that have to do with the discussion we're having right now about stop and frisk? That's a hell of a non sequitur.
No, it takes a second. You've got to bring in different voting groups, not lose them. What Donald Trump is trying to bring in is victims of crime or people who are afraid of crime. What Hillary Clinton's been trying to do is bring in millennials. His approach probably worked for his target audience in the debate. Her approach, which was to try and appeal to millennials via the Miss Universe controversy, has just been radically undercut by this audio, which I think will probably dominate the next 24 to 48 hours.
And I doubt it will. We can bring back the polling on millennials. Donald Trump has been crushed with millennials. He's not more than 22% with millennials. And I can put that crime rate number back up. The People's Nina Turner sort of fear of crime has nothing to do with reality. And I would posit to say it has something to do with race, because there are places like Waukesha where there are no African Americans, where they're talking about these fears of crime. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Joe, you're absolutely right. He's tapping into the fear and the anxiety and the grievances of the forgotten. And that forgotten folk, demographically, he's speaking to the blue-collar, working-class, white folks in this country. And that's not to say that they all have those types of tendencies, but we've all been socialized in a society in America, whether you're white, black, Latino, Asian, Native American, you know, the mosaic of humanity in this country. We have been socialized in a society that says that black folks are more criminal than anybody else, and unless we deliberately deconstruct our construction all throughout our lives, we have that, and it is really very much in the DNA of America. And so it is easy for Mr. Trump to tap into that, but we have to call it what it is. And this whole law and order doesn't work. It's not a good look for the African American community or the Latino community or even poor communities, because what it means when we hear that is there is a siege and or an occupation of our communities, and it does not do a whole lot to bring together law enforcement and the African American community in particular, where we know that the tensions are really high because the African American community is asking for accountability, asking for transparency, asking for trust, but also a high level of respect for law enforcement in that community. So it is a false narrative altogether, but it is tapping into, Joy, an emotional fear that people have in this country, and that fear is very much targeted towards African Americans.
And Michael, you know, we have that millennial number. Let's put it up really quickly of how the two sides are doing in terms of millennial voters, and we'll put that up in a second. But when you're talking particularly about young African Americans, there is this narrative that there's not a lot of excitement to get out and vote. There's not a lot of enthusiasm or motivation. Just talk like this about law and order, about lock her up, about bringing back stop and frisk, about having Rudy Giuliani, who as mayor did nothing but target African Americans with this police force that was not in uniform and sort of stalking the streets of the city, harassing men of color. Does this finally get millennials, black millennials, to focus on this election?
Well, I don't think that they're unfocused on the election. It's obviously a very engaged and very politically activated generation, but I think that question that happened during the debate, like the very first race question, encapsulated young black people's frustration with the conversation around racism in the United States, and wanting the framing of the question, like, how are we going to get to racial healing, right? Yeah. Like, instead of how are we going to undo institutional racism? And then then Hillary Clinton's answer was unsatisfactory in that, like, she starts off talking about policing and, like, shifts to crime and, like, opens that door. And then you have, like, Donald Trump's bluster and all of his racism and his employing of racist language in the throwback and then all of that. And, like, that's also scary. So it's not that people are not, like, young black people are not engaged. What they're seeing is that no one is opening the door up to talk about how the ways in which institutional racism overdetermines black people's lives and how then to dismantle that, and then narrowly focusing when the question comes to race on criminal justice reform, right? Like on something like that, instead of talking about like education, instead of talking about housing, instead of talking about water, right?
Yeah.
You know, things like that we see play out over and over again, and no one wants to get to the root that racism is an undercurrent that runs every institution in the United States.
And you know, I have to ask you this question, Hugh, because, you know, I'm starting to kind of have these conversations with people in my own life that, you know, I think the statistics are in Hillary Clinton's favor, but Donald Trump could still win. He could still become president. I want you, for our audience, Hugh, imagine, what does the race conversation look like in America with Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and that crowd, Stephen Bannon, you know, David Bossie, with these people empowered? What does the race conversation look like a year from now?
Well, let's go back. I traveled the country with Sheriff David Clark 2 weeks ago, the African-American sheriff of Milwaukee County.
Here we go. David Clark has to be one of the most hated black men in America for his self-hating comments about the black community. And that's why I believe that this guy is sliding into the Trump camp, because David Clark is one of Donald Trump's biggest supporters, that super coon ass motherfucker.
He was an adamant Donald Trump supporter, and he believes that the conversation about race has to shift dramatically. I want to go back and note, though, you're absolutely correct. Hillary Clinton has a huge advantage in polling among millennials and among African-American millennials. But if she doesn't get them out to vote, that doesn't count. And that's why this new tape of her dissing the Bernie Sanders
Hugh,
vote
we're not going to go back.
matters.
Hugh, you're an expert at pivoting, but I need you to just answer the question because we don't have a ton of time. What does the race conversation look like a year from now if Donald Trump is president? Just that
I think David Clark will be leading it for Donald Trump. President Donald Trump is the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security.
Well, then he's going to get 0% of the African American vote. David Clark is the sheriff whose hostility toward African Americans is probably only outstripped by Rudy Giuliani's. And didn't somebody just starve to death, didn't somebody just die of thirst in his jail? I'm not sure. Okay, let me go to Nina Turner. Nina,
I don't think they're going to get 0% of the African American vote.
David Clark is leading the.
No, I don't think they're going to get 0% either, but yeah, I would be greatly surprised if he got more than 2. And that's my honest opinion. Others have said barely into double digits. I'm saying 2, and I'm sticking to it. If he gets more than 2, if he gets more than 4, actually, you could slap me and call me and whatever you want to call me. My number's 2, and I think even that number's high.
Conversation on race. Good luck with that. They might as well stick with Giuliani if they're going to go that route. Nina Turner, you are the mother of a law enforcement officer. You're somebody who's sort of understands this race conversation from both sides of it. What does the race conversation look like in a Donald Trump presidency, in your view, a year from now if he were to win?
Well, given what he started in Cleveland, make America safe again, it doesn't look very good. I certainly agree with the young man, and my apologies for not remembering his name, in that both candidates were woefully inadequate in addressing this issue. One of the things I think we can go back to, and we should go back to, is the Kerner report in the 1960s, of which President LBJ did not take any of their recommendations, but they really pointed out that we are moving towards 2 societies, one black, one white. Now, we know it's more multicultural now, but one black, one white, separate and unequal. And that is the reality. And a lot of the recommendations in terms of the most powerful, most wealthy country on the face of this earth, really using the power of public policy and public will to make the requisite changes in this country. African Americans are not delusional. Institutional racism does exist socially, economically, politically, legally, all of that. And unless we have the political will to say, yes, it exists, and yes, we, both public and private private sector are going to step up and do something about it. And Joe, you're absolutely right. I worry about my son all the time on both sides. A young man who wears a badge and a gun, who took an oath to protect and serve, but also when he is out of uniform is just as vulnerable as anybody else. I get it that people in law enforcement want to see their loved ones come home safe. That is a given. But we can have all of that. And so when you have a candidate that is continuing to build that tension between black and brown folks and law enforcement, it does not help law enforcement, and it does not help the United States of America. So we have to have a come to Jesus meeting, Joy, in this country real quick. And I don't believe that we have to wait for the next presidential candidates and city councils who need to use their political power, clout, and might to do something right now in this country.
Well, and to that point, I'm going to end with you on this, Michael. I had a conversation today with somebody who really said something eye-opening to me, that if Donald Trump were to become president of the United States, pretty soon that model for winning is going to catch on. And pretty soon you're going to have Mayor Donald Trumps and Governor Donald Trumps and Judge Donald Trumps and District Attorney Donald Trumps. You're going to have his ideology proliferate throughout our sort of governmental system, right down to where it could actually impact you and I individually in the cities in which we live.
Too late, Joy. We already have Mayor Donald Trumps and Governor Donald Trumps and Police Commissioner Donald Trumps and Police Officer Donald Trumps. Okay? Too late. We already got them. The problem is, how do we get rid of them? And I point you to the governor of Michigan, okay? The governor of Ohio, to some extent. The governor definitely of North Carolina. The governor of Alabama. The governor of Mississippi. The governor of Texas. We already have governors and mayors and police commissioners and police officers Donald Trumps.
What does that race conversation look like a year from now if there are Sheriff David Clarks in charge of criminal justice in our communities, and if on the economic side, you know, there are people like Stephen Bannon?
Well, I honestly think no matter who's president, the race conversation looks like Ferguson, and it looks like Baltimore, it looks like Charlotte, it looks like the movement on the ground. I think, though, that what we'll have if Donald Trump were to be president, if we were to have this sort of proliferation of folks like Donald Trump being elected into office, we're going to see just more of we're going to see more of what people will call riots. We're going to see that happen because the frustration will boil over. I think if Donald Trump loses, I think we're going to see a level of violence that we're not prepared for because of the frustration on that side. Yeah. But I think that we have to prepare ourselves for the fact that this is a volatile moment, and we're not clear on what it looks like on the other side of this election.
Yeah.
Now, let me translate the end portion of that statement for you. If Donald Trump wins, we are going to have riots. There may be some looting. There may be some burning. Okay? But that, for the most part, is what may or could happen if Trump wins, because there will be a pervasive feeling of oppression by minorities, and in particular black people. But, and let me further translate, on the other side, if Donald Trump loses and the neo-Nazi white supremacists have to go back underground, there are going to be more killings of people of color in retribution to the loss. Now, you can call me a racist, whatever, whenever, whyever, whatever you believe, okay? But that's just my honest feeling. And I'm down here in Texas. And East Texas, I absolutely guarantee you, is going to be crazy about this, as will various other areas around the country that have a, shall we say, decent amount of alternate right, fuck that, white supremacists in their communities. So we're going to be looking at a problem one way or the other. And I honestly, from the left or from the right, I really haven't heard a solution of any kind that is viable and that will help to alleviate this situation. Most people don't even want to talk about it, and if you can't talk about a problem, you damn sure can't fix one.
And to your final point, Donald Trump going back on his idea of accepting the results of the election does not bode well for results, no matter what happens. Michael Denzel Smith and Nina Turner, thank you both. Congratulations on the book, Michael. And Hugh Hewitt will be back later in the show. All right, up next. Thank you, my one.
All right, so thought that was a bit informative.